Hello and welcome to episode. I think we're at 19, but
Oh, okay.
that's probably going to be wrong because I've been wrong the last couple of episodes. But we'll call this 19. Tonight I have with me a good friend of mine, Dietrich Stogner. Dietrich and I have known each other through TikTok for I guess a couple of years now. And so Dietrich, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
You have been somebody I've wanted to have on for quite a while, and because I'm a big fan of your writing and you're just a creative dynamo. You've really been putting out some great books, and you're the kind of writer that this show is all about. I guess I shouldn't narrow it down to writer. You're the kind of creative person that this show is all about.
Well, I
Um,
appreciate that.
yeah. So before we get started on the meat and potatoes, tell me a little bit about your writing background. How long have you been a writer, and what got you started down that path?
Sure. Well, I have wanted to be a writer since I was about 14. My dad was reading a book. I asked him what it was about, and he said, "Oh, you can't read this. It's too you're too young to read this." Which is, if you ever say that to a 14-year-old, pretty much just guarantees that's the next thing they're going to grab. So he went on deployment a few days later, and I snuck it out of his room, and it was Christine by Stephen King. And
Ah,
at the age of 14, something like that, that's just a lightning bolt to your skull. Like, I could not believe somebody got paid to do something like that. And I wanted to be a writer from that moment on. I kind of dabbled off and on for most of my 20s. When I got out of the Navy, I went back to school on the GI Bill. Got my degree in journalism, and I worked as a journalist, freelance journalist, for about 3 years. And while I was doing that, I wrote my first book, which was a noir mystery called 72 Hours. And I indie published that, and it didn't go the way I had hoped. And to be honest, I did a lot of things wrong with it. This was back in 2011. There was nowhere near as much support for indie authors as there is now. And also, there's a lot about that book I would change. I don't really promote it at all, simply because that's one that I think I might one day like to go back and revisit. But after that, I ended up with about a 10-year period of writer's block, where I really couldn't get any significant projects moving. I wrote a couple short stories, started a few manuscripts, but nothing really came of it. But then in 2020, we all got a little bit of a break at home, whether we liked it or not. And I had been DMing a D&D campaign for about 3 years. I had homebrewed the entire thing. I'd created this whole world. And we had finished the campaign, and I found myself kind of mulling through in my mind some other stories that I would like to tell in it. So I decided to sit down and start writing, see if I could maybe get a book out of it. And that kicked off the series, the Eldari Archives, that I've been writing since then. Since then, I've published 3 books in that series. In 2023, I released Frostbitten. In 2024, I released Extraction, and then early last month, we released Ranger. And yeah, I found what I'm supposed to be writing, I think, because we're making good progress on this one. So
I think I'm going to create a Creative Dynamos bingo card, and D&D is going to be on that bingo card because you will not be shocked by this, but that comes up a lot with the writers that I've interviewed.
yeah,
It's amazing how role playing games in general have been a pathway into storytelling and into writing. And that surprises no one who has ever played a
yeah,
tabletop role playing game. But that's awesome. And then naturally that led you into building the fantasy world
hmm
that you built. Before we get started down that path, talking about your book specifically, I'm curious to know why, and I ask this question of all my indies, which are most of my writers that I interview, why did you decide to go the indie publishing route?
there were a number of reasons. I mentioned 72 hours. So the 72 hours I did indie publish, that was not the original intent. In fact, I had gotten an agent and even signed a contract with a mid-sized publisher back in 2010. It was honestly not the best way to experience that, because I think it gave me a very unrealistic view, because I pitched it to a friend of mine got me tickets to a local writing convention here in Nashville called Killer Nashville. They had agent pitches there. I pitched to one agent. She wanted the manuscript, ended up signing me. Pitched it to one publishing house. They liked it. They ended up signing it. And then both went bankrupt. That was in the thick of the post-recession, just gutting the publishing industry. And I kind of just threw my hands up and said, well, I don't want to deal with this anymore, and just self-published, which is the worst reason to do that. When I started looking at the Eldari archives and what I wanted to do, I spent about 6 months querying Frostbitten, and I had a few manuscript requests. I hadn't quite made the progress that I wanted to, and I was feeling very, very discouraged in that entire process. And a good friend of mine sat me down and asked me, what are your goals as a writer? And I thought about it, and I said, when I was a kid, I wanted to be best-selling author, books on all the shelves. But honestly, now I just want to get the books out there, see if maybe there's an audience for them. And she said, okay, well, do you think indie publishing or traditional publishing fits what you want to do right now better? And so I took a few months to kind of learn about what the indie publishing world was at the moment. Like a lot of us, I think Rebecca Thorne was just an invaluable resource, really kind of peeling the lid back on a lot of that stuff. But I talked to a number of others, and I decided that these were books that were important to me. They were books that I wanted to tell in a very specific way, and I thought that indie publishing was the right fit. And so that's the route I went. And overall, I feel really good about that. There are definitely days where I'm like, man, I wish somebody else could handle all of this stuff for me. But I think we all deal with that. For the most part, indie publishing has worked out fairly well for me. I've been happy with it.
I get that. Yeah, and I think that based on what I've seen and how your story has progressed, the story of you publishing these books, I think that it seems to have gone really well for you. I've enjoyed watching your success as you've sort of built your social media presence and built your audience. And I've read the first two books and enjoyed them thoroughly. I can't wait to get started on Ranger. Tell us a little bit about the world that you've built. And specifically, I'm interested in what sort of makes this fantasy world that you've created unique, because we see a lot of similarities between the different fantasy worlds that exist out there, and so many of them, this is a reason why that I don't read as much fantasy as I once did, is because they seem to be pastiches of either Tolkien or sort of Forgotten Realms, D&D. What sets your fantasy world apart from those kinds of, not that there's anything wrong with either of those things?
No. It's kind of funny. Early on in my writing, I had this genuine fear that I don't write very flowery prose. I don't have very Tolkien-esque prose. I can't. I've tried writing that way, and it comes across terrible. I mentioned I have a journalism degree, and that's honestly what has informed my writing style more than anything else, I think. And it wasn't until somebody explained to me that that's not a bug, that's a feature. That and I think when I started building, so it's a second world fantasy. But when I started building it, I was very judicious with what the major world differences were. Obviously, the geography, the culture of people, and all that is very, very different. But this is not a world that has multiple intelligent races. In my world, it's human beings are pretty much it as far as they know, and as what's brought forward in the books. I do my best for the fantasy elements, the magic, the monsters, the supernatural elements to be seasoning rather than the actual core of the story. I am a big believer that stories have to start and end with the characters and the plot. No matter what the genre is, that's what stories have to be baked into. And so I think where a lot of people do struggle is when the world building and the magic systems and the supernatural elements, that's what drives their story forward. And that's where I think it can get very difficult. And beyond that, I think I have very much tried to use this world, the Eldari continent that I've created to explore a lot of the questions I've had about society and culture and politics and religion, things like that. So there's a lot of mirroring in there. You have one nation in this world, Medici, that is uber capitalist. And one of the things I really do explore is what that looks like. Like, what happens when a true unbridled free market system is allowed to run rampant? It works out super great for a few and really, really bad for a lot of others. I have a religious faction in this book called the Confessors that have that are by all measures religious extremists, but it's given me the opportunity to like dig in and explore like why people believe that kind of thing, why people shift and make that a core tenet of their personality. But I think that the biggest thing that I hope people take away from my books, I love reading fantasy books with big end of the world stakes. Frodo going to destroy the ring. Randall Thor going to try to fight the Dark One. I love those, and yeah. I eat that up all day long.
Yep.
That's never going to be what I want to write. Instead, what I try to do is I have created this world, I've built this world, and then I try to tell smaller scale stories about individuals who are being impacted by these world-changing events from a distance. The story of Frostbitten follows a soldier and one small village. And one of the things that I've always loved about that story is if that story goes wrong for Tomas and everybody in Lehar, if every one of them die, okay, that stinks for them, but the rest of the world's going to spin on. In fact, a lot of people around the world aren't even going to know that it happened. Same with Aldo in Extraction. If Aldo fails and everything goes completely sideways, okay, it maybe a few people will know. But at the end of the day, I think fantasy is this incredible genre that lets us build these broad worlds, and I think that it's a shame that so many authors choose to only look at the macro and look at the large scale end of the world stake stories. These worlds are amazing, and I think there is room to tell how people are impacted by large events, but on a personal level. I think that more than anything else, that's what sets my world apart.
There are so many things that I can think of personally, having read the first two books, that really set your stories apart for sure. You mentioned it's a second world fantasy. I am not familiar with that term.
So, as I understand it, and I could very well be wrong, first world fantasy is a fantasy that takes place in our world.
Okay.
So think the King Arthur dramatization, such as La Vie de Guinevere by Paula Lafferty, which just took place. That is a first world fantasy. Outlander is another great example. Second world fantasy is what Tolkien did, which is, this is not our world, this is a different world, and part of the work is establishing the geography, the cultures, the religion, the species, and all of that kind of mess. Now, again, I could be very wrong about that term, and I encourage someone to correct me if that's the case, but yeah, that's what I understand it to be.
This being the internet, I'm sure somebody will be along momentarily to correct us.
Somebody at my window now, what the, yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the elephant, or rather the bull in the room with Extraction, Bull Seaman. That's going to be like the subtitle for this episode. What's the deal with Bull Seaman? You wanted to do a heist story.
I did.
And the center of that heist story is stealing bull semen.
Yeah.
Why?
So I'm very, very lucky. I have the world's greatest in-laws. My wife's parents live on an old farm in Springfield, Missouri, and that is cattle country. Like, when we're driving out there, we're passing just giant herds of cattle all over the place. And I was talking to my father-in-law a few years back, and he was telling me that one of the ranches out there had actually gotten licensed for the very first time to breed American Wagyu cattle. Huge deal, very, very expensive cows, of course. And I thought that this was very funny, that I made some joke about them basically being a bovine bordello. And he commented, he's like, well, actually, it's very, very expensive if you've got a ranch in, say, California, it's incredibly expensive to load your cows up onto a truck, drive them all the way out to Springfield, introduce them to the bull, hope that sparks fly, things take, whatever the case may be, load them back onto the truck, drive them all the way back out there, and then find out, well, it didn't work out. He said, so the easier way is that they harvest bull semen, that they collect bull semen from these bulls, they freeze them, and then they sell these for artificial insemination. And I was like, that is wild. I was like, how much do they charge for that? And he was like, each dose goes for around $75,000 to $100,000. And I was like,
Lord.
How many doses did they have? He says, yeah, at one point they had over 600 vials of this stuff in their freezer. And I started doing the math and realized that meant that there were millions of dollars worth of bull semen sitting in a freezer in Springfield, Missouri. And because I'm a writer, my head immediately went to, see, that's just a heist story right there. And I got kind of fixated on this idea. And I knew that I wanted Extraction to be a fantasy heist, so I thought that this was an interesting way to leverage that.
And we're just we're gonna use this as an excuse to see how many times we can say the word semen on a podcast.
My editor, Cameron Montague Taylor, who's brilliant. I love her to death. She has margin notes, of course, when she goes through my manuscripts. And one of my favorite margin notes, she said, I actually bought a whiteboard and put it up next to the desk for the number of times I wrote the word semen in your editorial letter. And she sent me a picture of it was like 12 hash marks, and she wasn't even on chapter 8. And so, yeah.
And these are no ordinary cows.
No.
And bulls.
No.
They're like the size of woolly mammoths, I think.
Yeah.
That's how I picture it in my head.
Yeah, I always want to have some fantastical elements in the story. I want to have something that kind of reminds you that this isn't quite our world. And originally they were just regular cows, and that just didn't sit well with me. So I started kind of doing a little bit of research, doing a little bit of exploration, and I actually found out that cows used to be much smaller. Back in like the 1600s, they were about half the size that they are now, and over years they've been bred to be bigger, to add more meat. And I started thinking about the idea of what if somebody from the 1500s showed up on like a Holstein ranch and saw what cows look like now, and so I just kind of carried that idea forward and built out these massive cows. Yeah.
And the description of the cattle pens and you're very talented at painting pictures of these amazing places where they keep these animals, and the characters sort of weave in between the legs of these things. And I guess what I'm saying is I really want there to be like a Netflix series or a movie or something.
I do feel it's the best. I joke all the time. I'm very bad at elevator pitches for my books, where you're supposed to be able to sum it up in 2 sentences. Extraction's the one exception. That's the easiest elevator pitch I've ever seen. I'll be at a convention and people walk by and like, you want to read a book about 2 guys trying to steal bull semen? And they'll be like, yeah, like nobody ever says no to that.
Who wouldn't? Who would
yeah.
not? That's so. I'm sure we'll talk more about bull semen in a minute, but
sure.
One of the things that I love about your writing is you know how to put the screws to your characters. In the first book, Frostbite, just the physical torment that you put the main character through, the cold that exists, like this is not just regular, it's a chilly day. There's a reason why the book is titled what it is. And then I think about the prison ship that Aldo, that's his name in Extraction, right? Aldo?
Yeah, Aldo.
Yeah, the prison ship that he is on for a period of time, the experience that he goes through there, you don't write horror per se, but I think that Frostbite is a fantasy horror novel in my mind because of the horror elements that exist in it are just mwah. You know how to torment your characters and how to ratchet up the tension. And so talk to me about how important that is and why that is important in your storytelling.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a running joke among people who read my stuff that if I were to ever be transported into my world, that every one of my characters would like to have 5 minutes alone in a locked room with me because I've
Yes.
put them through the ringer. But here's what I will say. I genuinely, so there's this writing technique that a professor of mine talked about called the narrative chain of misery, which is a very funny term. But what they effectively said is that, characters are defined by choices. Like, in order for a character to feel vivid and real, they have to make choices in the world. And in order for those choices to have weight, those choices have to have consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if they make a choice and nothing happens, who gives a crap? So you have to establish consequences for those choices. And those consequences have to result in some kind of trauma. They can be physical, it can be mental, it can be emotional. But again, if the consequences don't leave a lasting impression on the character, don't cost them something, I mean, who gives a crap? Like, it just doesn't work. And so it's not genuinely that I set out to intentionally beat the crap out of my characters. I love my characters. I really do. I want them to succeed. I think that's great and all that. But at the same time, like, I do my best to put my characters in positions where they have to make decisions. Sometimes those are very smart decisions. Sometimes those are very, very stupid decisions. The opening chapter of Extraction, when Aldo realizes that a young girl that he's been helping out and trying to make sure she doesn't starve is in trouble, Aldo makes a really stupid decision. And Aldo makes that decision because of who he is, because of what he's gone through, because of the way he sees the world. He's impulsive, he's rash, he acts without thinking, and so he makes a decision. And there are immediate consequences to that. And you have to play that out. Like, you absolutely have to. At one point, Tomas, who's the lead character in Frostbitten, he is a soldier, and he fundamentally believes that his purpose is to protect these people. Like, that is his driving core force. And when he makes a decision of what he's going to do to protect the people of Lehar, he follows through on it. But I'm not going to make it easy for him. Like, he goes through it. And in order for the reader to really commiserate with the character, they have to understand what they're going through, which means then you have to very much work on how you write the experience that character is going through, whether it's Tomas going for a 6-mile hike through the most inhospitable terrain on the planet, or whether it's Aldo in a harvesting shed finding out what the consequences of a decision he made actually are to somebody else. In any case, it's incredibly important to me that the reader feel in that moment that they are walking next to Tomas, that they're in that shed with Aldo, that they're hearing Jaina find out that her brothers are being called up to war in danger. Like, all of those, the reader has to feel it. Otherwise, I haven't done my damn job. And so, yeah, I think trauma is a big part of the books that I write, because I think trauma is a big part of the human experience.
Sure.
Thankfully, most of us have not had to do the things that my characters had to do, but we all have to go through certain things, and we all understand that those things, we make choices, those choices have consequences, and we carry the scars of those consequences for the rest of our life. They shape who we are, they shape the choices we make. And if I am doing my job as an author, then you as the reader have to feel those consequences in a very real way.
What really impresses me, though, as a fellow torture warden, is you don't start these guys on, like, Park Place.
No.
So, like, Tomas, if memory serves, and it's been a minute since I've read the book, he graduates from this very elite special forces type preparation, and instead of getting, like, a plum assignment, he basically gets assigned to bumfuck middle of nowhere Antarctica on top of a volcano.
Yeah.
And it's like the worst assignment he could possibly have pulled, and he has no idea why he's been given the shitty end of the stick. And it's a stick made of frozen shit. So he has, you've given him a shit stick with shit on it, and it only gets, then you dip it in kerosene and light it on fire. And so, yeah, it impresses me that, like, you start these people, and then, like, with Aldo, again, you mentioned right out of the gate, he makes some dumb decisions, and he's already in this intense poverty situation, and he's living barely hand to mouth, and nobody's going to hire him because he's got these tattoos that basically say this is a person you do not hire because he was a prisoner on a prison ship, which is where they basically put the worst people possible. The creativity that it takes to start these people on at like a -10 and then like take them down to -100 is just amazing.
I do think if there's a theme to my stories, it's that it's taking a character and establishing what their perspective of what the world was like at the beginning, and then having them come to learn that things are nowhere near as simple as they thought that they were. And unfortunately, like, I know for me, the moments in my life where I have made the biggest strides in growth as a person have not come about because everything was hunky-dory. Yes. They've come about because I found myself in a hard situation and I had to work my way back from there. Yeah, Tomas has put in the last assignment that he ever could want, and because I think that if the arc of a character is a soldier learning what it actually means to be a protector, to what it actually means to serve the people that he has always parroted the words about serving, but has never actually been in the position to serve them. If he's going to truly learn the lesson, it's not going to be, as you said, in Park Place. It's going to be in the frozen ass end of the world and up against the wall. And that's where I think people get to demonstrate exactly who they are. And I think at its core, in my mind, that's what I want to see in a hero. That's what I want to see in a person who we can root for and cheer for and cry over and our hearts break about, because we want them to win, but it doesn't mean anything if they don't have to work for it. So
yeah, these are not Mary Sue's. These are people who earn their stripes, and you watch them on the page earn their stripes. Like we don't see Tomas like go through the training, but we see what that training has made him, the mettle that it has given him, as he is tested and tried over and over again throughout the course of the story. And with Aldo, we see he's been tested and tried in his own ways, and he's developed his own set of skills, his own unique set of skills to survive in a world that just doesn't really care about him or people like him. One of the things that I really appreciate, and I'm sensing that I'm going to get this in Ranger as well, and we'll talk about Ranger in a minute, you don't shy away from social commentary. And the thing that I love about genre fiction is it allows us to, as creators, make social commentary without being necessarily preachy, because it gives us like a layer of remove from the real world. We can talk about how the poor are treated. We can talk about the haves and the have-nots, and we can talk about all kinds of religion or politics, and it's couched in a fantasy world or a far-flung future or what have you, and so we can get away with doing it in a way that is fun and entertaining, but it doesn't lessen the impact of that. Is that something that I know you're intentional about it, but do you sit down and say, this is the commentary that I'm going to be making in this story, or is it sort of organically grown out of the story? What does that process look like?
It's a little bit of a balance. There's an incredible author, Christine Folan, who writes more, what's the term for it? Dark fantasy, historical fantasy, stuff like that. But she said in a video once that fantasy and science fiction offer us a lens through which we can view our own world. And I genuinely believe that's the case, but I think that the lens in this case is your characters. I will say that I think that, I would be being disingenuous if I said I didn't think about, politics and my own beliefs and things when I'm writing my characters. And that bleeds through. Look, there are several choices I made about this world right off the bat that define very much how this world functions. But yeah, I look. I think that Vidici is such a great example where I recognize that you can't say that the free market doesn't work, because for some people it works great. It works better than anything else. The problem is that in order for the free market to function, some people have to suffer. There have to be losers if they're going to be winners. And I think that fantasy offers us a way to really kind of hold a lens up to that dichotomy, and to the injustice of that. In Frostbitten, one of the things I wanted to explore is the two different perspectives of empire from somebody who has benefited from the empire, which was me growing up. I was an army brat. I grew up surrounded by dyed in the wool patriots, hoorah USA, like people who believed hard, and I believed hard because of that. And it wasn't until I stepped outside of that world and got exposed to other people where I started to learn that for everybody that a nationalistic or imperial viewpoint benefits, that is all built on the backs of people that it exploited. And as soon as you start to understand that, then things look much more complicated. Then you understand that you don't get to build something like that without taking from other people. And when you come to realize that, it makes it very, very difficult to see the world in the same shape, in the same black and white sense. But I think ultimately, like, my characters are the way I explore that. Tomas is someone who grew up believing his country was right, and the mission was right, and his empire was right. And then he's exposed to the costs of what it took to build that. And so his journey of kind of coming to terms with that and figuring out how his morals and ethics and beliefs fit within this new understanding of the world, that is the core of what Frostbitten is. Like, at the end of the day, that's what that story is. Beyond the ice, beyond the monsters, beyond the spooky, spooky schools, the story is about somebody trying to figure out who they are in the light of learning more about the way the world actually works. And I honestly think Extraction's very much the same way, although thinks he understands what happened to him, what put him on that ship, what put him in prison. And then he learns the truth behind it, and the truth is not an easy, it doesn't let anybody off the hook, it doesn't immediately make things better, but it's human, and it's broken, and it's flawed, and how do you come to terms with that when you start to understand that the people you thought were impeccable are suddenly very, very human? Yeah, I try to explore that stuff through my characters rather than turning directly to the page and staring at the reader and being like, capitalism bad. So, I don't think anybody wants to read that.
No, but I mean, and that's the thing. That's where your talent lies, is the monsters and the spooky stuff and the fantasy elements are all so well done and so entertaining that the commentary is the medicine at the core of the really tasty hot dog. You're not a Robert Heinlein who, as talented as he was, a lot of times the medicine was a lot, it tended to overwhelm from time to time the tasty science fiction, which isn't always a bad thing, but sometimes it's a little more than. And I'm not saying you're a better writer than Robert Heinlein, so don't get your head.
No, I'm pulling that clip. Scott Roche says Dietrich Stogner whoops Heinlein's ass. That's going to be the pull quote on my next book.
Please do. I will endorse that choice. But yeah, it takes a deft hand to mix up that brew. One of the things that, and I think we've touched on this a little bit, but it's a question that I've written down, so I have to ask it. One of the things that I appreciate about your fantasy world, and it's something that I try and do with my own fantasy or even my horror, is it's super grounded in reality. And I do that so that my readers, when they get to the weird stuff or the fantastical stuff, it's that much weirder. It's that much more fantastical. But also, I think because I think it helps suspension of disbelief. What is your approach when it comes to making things grounded and realistic,
Mm-hmm.
and in a world that has like cows that are the size of a three-story building.
Uh, I have a very good friend, Josh Moth, who wrote book reviews for years and years, and he once said that there was an inverse relationship between the number of made-up words in your book and how difficult it was going to be for him to get into it. That, it was just like that. That was the more you force, and I really do believe reading is work. Like when you sit down and you read a book, you are investing into that work. You're investing your time. You're investing your attention, and I think some authors are so enamored by their own world, their own creation, that they forget that on the other end of this process is a reader who is trying to invest in your world. That is their goal. Their goal is to get lost. Nobody cracks up a book with, well, I'm sure somebody cracks up in a book with the intention of hating it, but the vast majority of people open a book wanting to be invested in.
I have hate read stuff. I have hate read stuff. And you have to, because I know for a fact you've hate read Twilight.
Listen, I tried to go, we can talk about Twilight later, but I tried to go into that with an open mind. It just fought me every step of the way. But I also think that there is one of the best fantasy authors in the world, N.K. Jemisin. She did a master class that I actually was able to take. And one of the things she talks about is that she genuinely believes one of the best things that you can do is minimize the amount of things that the reader will have to make a leap to get to. And so she said instead what you do is you start with a very small change comparatively, and you spiral out from there. You kind of explore how that impacts the world. So take Extraction. I decided, okay, these cows are massive, 2,000-3,000 pounds, maybe bigger. They're huge. So what does that mean about how you have to confine them, how you have to raise them, how you have to guide them? What does that mean about the way that this ranch operates? What does that mean about the way that they talk to each other, the way they take procedures? Because asking someone to believe, hey, these cows are extra big, that's an easy thing. But once I've planted that seed and I'm making logical steps out from there, all of that's easy for someone to follow, because they're making the same jumps I did when I was writing the book. When I talk about there's huge paddock walls holding in the bull, they're immediately going, yeah, of course, well, because big bull's going to try to get out. And so I really do try to limit the amount of very fantastical stuff and look at it from the idea of what is necessary to tell the story that I need to, and then once I figure out what I need to include in there, what are the supernatural, the fantastical elements that I am going to be putting into the book, then a lot of the world building spirals naturally off of that. Like, what does that then mean? Creating Lehar as a community in Frostbitten was very much that. This idea of this wildly frozen world and people building their homes literally on the shores of a lava river to survive. Everything about the world building and that was informed by that first decision. So what do they eat? How do they cook? What do they wear? What are their rituals like? Like, how do they approach that? And again, if you maintain that logical progression, if you introduce that one fantastical idea to the reader, say, here's what I need you to believe. I need you to believe that people could survive in this environment by building their home on the shores of a lava river. Then all the other leaps I make all click. They all make sense. They all track very, very easily. And I think that's really, really important to keep in mind. Every time you ask the reader to accept something fantastical, you're asking him to accept all the consequences of that thing too. So it's not a small ask ever.
No. And I even take it like one step, I don't know, lower, higher, I'm not sure. Like, if you have a thing in your fantasy world and it looks like coffee and it smells like coffee and it serves the same purpose as coffee, just fucking call it coffee, okay? Okay, I see you. Shoot. Dragon Riders of Pern, okay. Claw. I mean, yes, it's not exactly like coffee. It tastes like cinnamon, whatever. But, I try to keep the made up word. And actually, I'm in the process. This is me never having actually published a traditional fantasy novel. I'm in the process now of writing my first traditional fantasy story. I am keeping my made up words to a minimum because for that exact reason. Like, I want people to be able to read my story I'm assuming they've never read a fantasy novel
Yeah.
in their life. If they have, there will be Easter eggs aplenty. There are going to be elves and dwarves and halflings. This is my D&D homebrew game after homebrew world after all, but like it's all in English pretty much, and where I do insert some made up words, I use them very sparingly because I don't want to have to. I'm lazy. I don't want to have a glossary at the end of my book for you to
Yeah.
have to consult periodically.
I think the other thing is I don't ever want that to be what people remember from my books. And for the most part, I don't think it is. When people talk about what they loved about Frostbitten, it is not the monsters. It is not the aqua steel. It is not. It is Tomas just trying to survive for 6 miles. Just that ordeal of one foot in front of the other. It's them exploring a school that is abandoned and terrifying and wondering what happened. It is the betrayal. It is the betrayals that happen. It is that kind of stuff. I want people to come away from my stories remembering the characters and what they went through. The chapter in Extraction that everyone latches onto is chapter 14. It is the harvesting shed scene. And there is not a single supernatural element in that entire chapter. That is 3 men in a room and a horrible, horrible thing goes down. And that's what sticks with people. Because again, like, yes, people are like, I think the bulls are cool, but that's not at the end what makes them love the story. That's not what sticks with them at the story. And I don't want it to be. I want my characters to be the thing that they carry forward.
For me, it's the donkey.
Oh God, Stuart. Listen, Stuart should be a lesson to every author out there. Be careful what little random shit you put into your books, because you do not get to pick what your readers latch onto. That damn donkey is on the page for, I want to say, I think he's in the book for like 8 total pages. That's
Really?
it. It's not in the book a lot. And yet, if you go to Goodreads to the Extraction page, you go through the reviews, like, I swear, half of them are like, oh, it's Stuart. Stuart's so funny. I love Stuart and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
But
it's fine.
He's in key places in the story, and he's so
Yes.
cute. And for me, for Frostbite, like, it is about the monsters, but I'm just built different. I'm willing to accept that 100%, own that about myself. So let's talk about Ranger.
Sure.
Give me the breakdown. That is your newest novel that's just released.
Yeah, Ranger's a story I've had in my head for a long time. When I started writing the series, I actually did not start with Frostbitten. I started with, actually, the next book in the series, a book called Resonance. And I decided that I wanted to write some standalone stories that would help flesh out the world leading up to Resonance. Resonance's main character is a young woman named Elia Creighton, and she has 2 mothers. Her mothers are Jaina and Antoinette. And when I was doing the backstory work we all do when we're putting together a world like this, I wrote this story about how Jaina and Antoinette met. And I remember I was telling my best friend about this backstory, about this is how they met and all that. And I still, it's very vivid memory. We were by a food truck waiting to get empanadas in Smyrna, Tennessee. Very good empanadas too. But she was like, if you do not write that book, I will commit horrible acts of violence towards you. And here's the thing, I know my best friend, I love her to death. She wasn't lying, so I ended up having to write it. So Ranger is my first dual POV story, and it is as close to a fantasy romance as I mean, it is. It is a fantasy romance. It follows Jaina Creighton, who is a young woman. She's a blacksmith's apprentice who has a pretty good life. She's not rich, but her family owns an inn in a decent-sized city, and she loves her family. She is very close with them, including her 2 twin older brothers. And in the opening chapter, Jaina finds out that one of her brothers has been conscripted into the Dominion military. That's normal. It happens. Every young man has to serve for at least a short period of time. It's mandatory. But then when she gets there, she finds out that actually both of them got called up, and then they find out every young man in town, and maybe not so young, and maybe a little too young, got called up, and then realizing all the men are getting called up. And Jaina panics. She is really freaked out. She's realizing the only reason they'd be doing this is there's a war coming. And she finds out about an order that they all know about called the Rangers. The Rangers are kind of half legend, but they're part of the community. They like people have met them. There's one in town. And in talking with one, she asks him if any of his family got called up, and he points out that one of the benefits of being a ranger is your family is exempt from conscription.
Ah.
And so Jaina makes the very impulsive decision, because she's 19, she really wants to protect her family, to join the Rangers. And Jaina's very first assignment is to protect a very, very wealthy heiress from the city of Medici. She's the heir of an old, very powerful family named Antoinette DeLuca. Tony DeLuca, Antoinette's grandmother, was actually featured in Extraction. Mm-hmm. Tony DeLuca is going to be a very big part of my world moving forward. And Antoinette is sent to the Dominion to complete an art commission where she does a giant relief carving for a duke's palace. And because she's so wealthy, it is decided that she will be given a ranger escort. This is a very easy job, or so they think. So they give it to the brand new ranger, Jaina. So Jaina is Antoinette's bodyguard. The thing that you as the reader will know right from the jump is that Antoinette is not just an artist. Antoinette's a spy. The whole reason that she has trained to be an artist is because that gets her invited into the homes of the rich and the powerful, and then she listens and she gathers information. And so it is about the two of them coming together, about the two of them not being able to be together, and yet the chemistry between them being very, very vivid, while in the background, Jaina is desperately trying to figure out how long it's going to take her to get her brothers back. And that's the story as it plays out. And then things go from there. And if you've read any of my books, you know that everything goes great. Everybody comes home safe and happy, and everybody has a wonderful time. It's great.
Yes. Clearly, there will be no consequences and
no, not at all.
No bad choices, and none of the things that we've discussed over the past 40 minutes.
Yeah. With Ranger, I really wanted to explore two angles. From Jaina, it's what are we willing to do to protect the people that we love? What are the lengths that we are willing to go through? And what are the things that we are willing to sacrifice? And when we make those sacrifices, what is the actual cost that we pay? What do we lose? And with Antoinette, I wanted somebody who was laboring under the weight of expectations and for the first time found herself away from her family, away from the people who've influenced her the whole life, and starts thinking about what she wants instead of what her family wants. And I found it really interesting to put those two on a collision course and watch how they play off of each other.
Unless I'm missing something, you are clearly not a lesbian.
No, I am indeed not a lesbian. That is very true.
And so I am curious, as a cisgendered male, how shall I put this? What makes you think you can write a lesbian romance?
You know what? That is a fantastic question, and it's one I asked myself about 400 times. I knew that I wanted to tell their story. I also recognized very quickly that I lacked the experience or the perspective to be able to tell the story the way that it needed to be told. So even before I began plotting out the story, coming up with the outline, I sat down with several friends of mine who are queer, have lived that lifestyle, and I began asking them some of the things that I needed to avoid. But then I made a couple choices. First choice, Ranger is closed door. That was never going to be a factor. Anything that happens between the two of them happens behind closed doors, because I do not believe I have the capabilities to write that in a respectful and comprehensive way. The next thing I did is, before I ever started writing, I reached out to a sensitivity reader. I was very, very fortunate. Rebecca Thorne offered to be the sensitivity reader for this book. She did an incredible job. And then my developmental editor, C, is also LGBTQ. And so I went to each of them with this perspective of, I understand I am going to make mistakes as I portray the relationship between the two of them. And I need support in order to identify those, because my goal is to tell Jaina and Antoinette's story in a respectful and authentic way, in a way that they deserve. As I said, I genuinely care about my characters. I spent a lot of time in their heads. I spent a lot of time thinking about what they want, what their goals are in life, and I wanted this to be a good portrayal of them. So I basically had to come up with a plan from the jump, and so I asked for help. I made sure that when I sent it out to beta readers, that I had lesbian and queer beta readers that could come back, and they came back and told me a lot of things that I needed to change. Some were very tiny things that, as a cis man, I would never think of, and it was an easy fix. Some were the way that that relationship was unfolding maybe didn't feel quite valid. Oh, excuse me. Mm-hmm. But I think the best decision I made with Ranger from the jump was to acknowledge my limitations, acknowledge where my lack of experience was going to cause an issue, and figure out what support I needed to bring in. And I will say, I am very, very proud of the fact that I have had several reviews by lesbian readers who have praised this for being a really, really solid portrayal. And to that, I say, thank Tony Snyder, thank Rebecca Thorne, thank Cameron Montague Taylor, thank the people who were willing to step up and support me as I put this story together.
And I think, and I hope you know that I asked that question because I suspected that the answer would be something exactly like you put out. And I think that that is just a testament to you as a person, but it's also proof that we as writers can step outside some of the things that identify us, and we can write characters that are different from ourselves, but we need to make sure that we take appropriate steps to make sure that we are presenting these characters in ways that are authentic and respectful. So, because we need representation in our stories.
Yeah, no. I have built this world, and it would be lazy of me to only populate it with people who looked like and sounded like and had the same life experiences as me. I think that every writer needs a little bit of ego. You have to be able to say, I'm going to work for years on this thing, and because I think people are going to love it, because I'm great at this. There's got to be a bit of ego. But you also have to be able to step away from your ego and acknowledge where there are areas where you need support, where you need help, because it doesn't take anything away from you as a writer. I actually think it makes you a better writer when you listen to people who can give you that perspective.
Absolutely. We're coming close to up to time, but one thing I wanted to ask you before I let you go is, you have built up what I feel like is a very good community on TikTok, a place that is not necessarily known for good, healthy interaction. And I think you have been able to leverage that into some success. I'm curious to know, A, if I'm wrong about that last part, leveraging it to some success, and B, I'm curious beyond just, I'm not going to let you say, well, I was just lucky. So I'm going to take that away from you. How what you think you've done to build that community beyond just good fortune.
Well, you're right. I have been very fortunate to build a remarkable community. And I think that the biggest thing is that I don't think of it as my community. It's a community that I've gotten the privilege to be a part of. I have people ask me this question a decent amount because I do get it. I was on TikTok for 6 months before I had any real traction with anyone. I would throw videos out there that no one would watch them. It felt like I was shouting into a void. There were a couple times I just wanted to quit. And I will cite a few. I was very fortunate to meet Kate Page, who I have gotten very close with, a remarkable author on TikTok. But more than that, just a genuinely kind and decent person, like a very, very, very good person. But one of the things that I figured out really quickly was that all of us have things that we can contribute to a group, whether that's you know how to edit, whether that's you're good at art and you can help do some character art for people, whether that's you're willing to raise your hand to be a beta reader, whether that's you're willing to raise your hand to be a narc reader and spread the word, whether that's you really like reading indie books and you want to talk about them online, whatever the case may be, there are things that we all have that we can contribute to a community. And I'm a firm believer that you get out of something what you put into it. And I think for community, for me, that has proven to come back tenfold. I love the community I've found. I love the community of indie authors. And I love the fact that I have reached a point where people come to me and say, hey, I want to write a book and I don't know where to get started. And I was hoping you could help me because I can provide guidance to that. I can be the person that people like Kate Page, people like Rebecca Thorne were for me when I came on and just got started. And look, I tend to push back against the idea. Follower count is never going to reflect in sales. I will tell you that right now. I have probably 10, 15 times more followers now than I do when Frostbitten came out. Frostbitten sold better in the first few months than any of my other books. Like, Frostbitten actually absolutely took off. What it does lead to when you do start gathering that community, getting a following and stuff like that is sometimes you will get people who decide to take a chance on your book simply because you've given them a chance to see the person that you are and what you like, what you care about, what you're passionate about, what you think is funny, what you like to just goof around about, stuff like that. This is a weird example. A few months back, Kate Page and I actually watched through the entirety of Gilmore Girls. And every time we finished the season, we would do a live where we talked about that season. Those lives are the biggest thing I've ever done. Like, far beyond. I'll go on here and talk about my books, and I'll get like 20 people who will show up and be like, hey, cool. Those Gilmore Girls live, we're talking about this idiotic show. We had like 400 people at one of the lives. It was absolutely buck wild. Nobody on there cared that I was a writer. Nobody. Nobody asked about writing and all that. But I announced that I was doing a launch party for Ranger here in Nashville. And one of the women who had come to several of those lives lived in Knoxville, and she went, you know what? Why not? She drove out. She came to the launch party. Never met her before. She came there. She read Ranger. She's read both the other books. She loved them. Those Gilmore Girls videos had hundreds of thousands of views. Those lives had hundreds of attendees. And all in all, I got one reader out of them. But that means so much to me. That means so much that somebody looked at me, saw the person I am, and said, you know what? I want to give these books a shot. Because I think my books are strong enough that when somebody decides to pick them up, they're going to be sold. So, yeah, I think community is a tricky thing. It's never going to be exactly what you thought it was going to be. I certainly never thought that a lot of my followers would come about because I read Twilight, or because I got really mad at a book one day, or because I do reviews of. I had no idea that's where they'd come from. But at the end of the day, I try to be the person that I want, the kind of person that I would want to interact with. I try to give back as much as I can. And I've been very, very fortunate to have a community that has responded and has been so supportive of me.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, Dietrich, it's been good talking with you. I could talk with you for another hour.
Yeah, it's fun.
And so just let people know where we can find you.
Yeah, I'm on both TikTok and Instagram at Dietrich Stogner. It's pretty easy to find me on there. I am trying to get things going on YouTube. That's proven to be a little bit trickier. But you can also find my books just about anywhere. Ranger, by the way, I will say, is my first book to get an audiobook. It was narrated by the astonishing Cassie Corbin, who has been absolutely tearing people's hearts out of their stomachs through that audiobook narration, and it's absolutely phenomenal. That's through Libro FM is the best place to go if you want to get the audiobook for that. But yeah, find me in any of those places. Awesome. And then I'm in Nashville, so if you're in the Tennessee area, drop me a line, and yeah, it's great.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks a lot, Scott.